The race for first place between Pomni and Jax just keeps getting crazier by the day. If you think back to the first few hours of voting, it looked like the purple rabbit had it in the bag, then Pomni took the lead and held it for a while. But yesterday, Jax managed to snag the top spot for a short time before Pomni snatched it right back just a couple hours later. What's wild is that the gap between them has constantly stayed under 1,000 votes, so at any moment one of them could pull ahead and never let go of that lead. I think it's pretty clear by now that Kinger ain't catching up to him, and the rest are so far behind first and second place it's honestly kinda scary to even think about. But aside from the fight for the crown, we've got this wild side drama going on. Who's gonna end up being the worst character according to the fans? And as funny as it sounds, Kane's tactics are actually working, cause he's slowly closing the gap with 6th place. Still, I bet most of y'all don't really see the admin as a serious contender here. What's way more interesting is that little rivalry between Zubul and Ragatha. So what do you think? Who's taking the top spot, and who's gonna crash down to 6th? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about why Jax or Pomni totally deserve to be the fan favorite of the amazing digital circus. With Pomni, it's all pretty clear. She's the main character the whole story revolves around, and after what went down in episode 5, where she finally started feeling more at ease in the circus, a lot of fans reconnected with her, making it super interesting to watch how her mindset evolves in the upcoming episodes. As for Jax, it's also pretty obvious. He's that chaotic wild card every show needs. Not exactly an anti-hero, but definitely heading in that direction. And let's be honest, the creators nailed the timing by dropping this vote right after an episode that heavily focused on the dynamic between these two. But what's going to be way more interesting is seeing how these characters act in episode 6 after the results of this award come out, especially in the middle of a brand new adventure, and whether they can actually hold on to their spots at the top. So let's dive into that right now. First off, I want to talk about the new adventure, which most likely has something to do with a farm, and there's a couple solid facts backing that up. If you think back to episode 4, where right at the start, the creators dropped a clear hint about one of the adventures in episode 5, basically confirming what fans had been guessing. Then if you look at the beginning of episode 5, we clearly hear Kinger asking for something, and it's not hard to figure out that the kind of stuff he's talking about would totally be found on a farm, and that same farm was also mentioned by Ragatha.
I was born into a fairly wealthy family. We had a large property with horses and chickens, and my mother...
And of course, that funny little corn phobia Jax has is also tied to the farm, and Gooseworx actually confirmed that officially. Plus, if you think back to that so-called leak, by the way, I still can't find the right word for this kind of info, cause teaser or leak doesn't really fit. So, in that same leak where each episode gets summed up with one word, episode 6 got hit with the word guns, and it totally makes sense that it could be linked to either hunting or, yeah, a farm, because every farmer's got to have a gun to protect their land. If you piece all that together, it's pretty obvious that there's like a 99% chance the new adventure location's gonna be that farm. So now that we got the theme of the adventure figured out, it's time to move on to the actual plot. But before that, there's a few more things we gotta keep in mind. One time, Gooseworx straight up said that episodes 5 and 6 would be equally focused on Jax and Ragatha, and judging by what went down in episode 5, that makes total sense. And if that's the case, then these episodes are probably meant to be one big continuous story. So episode 6 is basically a direct continuation of episode 5, just like what we had with the pilot in episode 2. On top of that, it's super important to remember that episode 5 kinda wrapped up the whole era of chill setup type episodes that were slowly leading us into the core of what the digital circus is really about. And starting from episode 6, we're headed straight into the storm. Before we dive into the plot, let's take a quick look back at the final scene of episode 5. We clearly see two things that are going to have a direct impact on episode 6. So first, let's talk about Pomni and Jax, who at this point seem like legit good friends, and once they walk off together, they'll probably have a convo. And the main thing they're going to talk about is obviously Ribbit, because we've seen more than once how curious Pomni is about that whole thing.
What was that about?
It's nothing. Who cares?
So, you wanna talk about that?
I'm in a maid outfit. What do you think?
And I'm pretty sure that in a moment like that, Jax is actually going to tell her the full truth. And while that's happening, we'll probably get a kind of flashback from Jax's memory that takes us back to the day it all went down. And if you remember how Jax reacted when Kaufmo turned into an abstracted monster, it's totally possible that those words Gooseworx talked about were actually meant for Ribbit during his own abstraction. And on top of that, they're probably going to share some pretty personal stuff with each other. So, right before the chaos hits, we're finally going to get to truly understand who these characters really are. The final scene also gave us one more big detail, which is Ragatha's full-on collapse, or like her final moment of being done with everything. Even though we already noticed some weird stuff about her back in the pilot, she kept it pretty well hidden through the next few episodes, up until episode 5, where after Jax and Pomni became friends, you could say her whole world just fell apart. And most likely, while we're watching that convo between Pomni and Jax, we're also going to see Ragatha wandering around the digital circus. And that teaser we got is probably a direct reference to that moment. But that's just the beginning of the episode, because we still haven't gotten to the classic scene where Cain gathers everyone and then they all head out on another adventure. Honestly, I don't know if this one's going to be pulled from the suggestion box or just made up by Cain, but either way, it's definitely going to be the farm. And that's exactly where the first stage of that storm Gooseworx mentioned on Tumblr is going to kick off. The farm's crazy symbolic for both of the main characters in this episode. And most likely, both Jax and Ragatha are going to end up playing out roles that reflect who they were in real life. That's when we'll finally find out the truth about how they're connected. I'm like 100% sure these two were never a couple, because Gooseworx straight up hates that kind of theory, so that's definitely not canon, but the idea that they could be siblings totally makes sense. Plus, we already know Ragatha's older than Jax, and that's probably why in a lot of scenes she acts like some kind of older sister. I even made a whole separate video where I broke down all the evidence for that theory, but it's important to remember it's still just a theory and, yeah, it might end up being wrong. But what really sticks with me is the fact that they were definitely connected in some way back in the real world, and that same feeling hits me when I think about why Jax is so terrified of corn. Like what actually happened to him on that farm that messed him up so bad. And I think I might have figured it out, but to get there, we gotta go back to Ragatha's monologue. We get that Ragatha grew up in a pretty strict family where her mom wanted her to be an obedient and perfect daughter, but we also learned her family was pretty rich and could afford a lot of things. I feel like during the adventure in episode 6, we're gonna get way more details about Ragatha's past, and it's pretty likely her family was super conservative, and you could even say aristocratic. It makes total sense for families like that to have all kinds of workers, from gardeners to corn pickers. And what if that corn picker was actually Jax and Ragatha's family treated him pretty badly, but Ragatha herself was nice to him, and that's why she kind of took on the role of an older sister. But besides that, episode 6 might be a turning point for Ragatha, because during or right after it, we're going to find out what her future looks like. And if you think back to how jealous Ragatha gets about the friendship between Pomni and Jax.
First steps of a budding friendship, right, Ragatha?
Hey, Pomni. Remember when Kaufmo smashed me against the walls and I got all jumbled up? All things considered, that was pretty funny, right?
It's clear she totally gets how messed up her mental state is already getting close to full-on depression and even abstraction. And because of that, she desperately needs a real friendship with Pomni, because that's the only way she can prove to herself first and foremost that she's a good person, and finally break free from those messed up childhood standards that have been weighing her down. That would make Ragatha's life way easier, and that's why during the adventure, she's going to do everything she can to win back Pomni's trust, just like back in episode 3. But after everything that went down in episode 5...
Calm down a bit.
What? You're the one who said it's fine to be a jerk sometimes! I'm sorry, Pomni.
That's going to make it way harder for her to do so. So yeah, now you've got the full picture of the new adventure and the key stuff about the farm in episode 6. But what if things don't go as planned and Ragatha totally loses her reason for being in the digital circus and just accepts that her end is near and she's about to meet Kaufmo? Well, in that case, that could be the start of the so-called storm. Because don't forget, episode 5 clearly hinted that mysterious mannequin's gonna play a big role in the digital circus.